This video will assist you with your program enrollment and entry process. Information on program enrollment and entry, along with the accompanying forms, are located within Schoology in the West Virginia Teacher Group, under Resources, inside the Instructor Handbook and Instructor Handbook Appendices. You will look for Section 4, titled Program Enrollment and Entry. Section 4 contains critical information, and you must review this entire section very carefully. This video will assist you specifically with your general student orientation and intake procedures. Please take note, we are reviewing the general student orientation and intake procedures. You will find additional orientation information for specific types of students within Section 4. For example, if a student only wants to take the High School Equivalency, or HSE, Readiness Assessment, they will not need to go through the general orientation process unless they do not pass the HSE Readiness Assessment or if they choose to study before taking the Readiness Assessment. For these students, see the orientation process for High School Equivalency Diploma candidates in Section 12 of the Handbook. Please be sure to review additional details such as this for the different type of procedures for specific types of student orientation listed inside Section 4. Within the Instructor Handbook Appendices, under Resources, inside the West Virginia Teacher Group, you will find a number of forms which you will need when conducting student orientation and intake. This would be a good place to pause this video and print yourself a copy of the forms to follow along for the remainder of this video for the following forms: Checklist for Student Orientation and Intake, West Virginia Adult Ed Student Profile, and the Program Files Checklist. The first element of an effective classroom management system involves a thorough student orientation and registration process. A separate, uninterrupted session apart from the regular instructional time is ideal. It is usually more time efficient and effective if orientation is conducted on a managed intake with students at an appointed date and time. Avoid conducting student orientation on a drop-in basis during your usual instructional time, what is known as open intake. This oftentimes distracts students already enrolled in the class who need your time and attention and may result in a hurried, less than thorough orientation process for new students. Let's take a look at the checklist for student orientation and intake. All orientation and intake activities must be completed during the first 12 hours of attendance. Depending upon whether your class is full-time or part-time, all or some of the orientation may or may not be completed at the first meeting. At a minimum, the left side of the checklist should be completed at the first meeting. The first item on the checklist for student orientation includes a welcoming activity. Greet students in a relaxed manner with a welcoming smile. Introduce yourself and try to put students at ease. Keep things informal, but on an adult level. Ask new students how they found out about the class and what they already know about adult education programs. Before moving further with the checklist for student orientation and intake, it's important to note what type files you must maintain. West Virginia Adult Ed instructors are required to maintain various kinds of program information. 3 specific types of files are necessary. You may want to color code these files to make it easy to recognize and differentiate between them. First, we have class files. Class files are maintained by the instructor or aide, and they are not accessible to students. Class files document student attendance, and they must contain the required West Virginia Adult Ed sign-in sheets for which you can find in Section 4 Handbook Appendices. And next, We have student working files. The student working file is maintained by the student, and it may be given to the student when they exit your program. And next we have permanent student files. The permanent student files are confidential and they must be kept in a locked file cabinet. Only school officials, along with you as the instructor, including regional and state staff or maybe program supervisors, can access these files. Students may review the permanent file by request. Permanent files include documentation on standardized assessments and achievements selected on the student profile and student achievements form. You'll be hearing more about other documents for which you will need to place in the permanent student file as you continue through pre-service. On your screen, you will see a program files checklist and a list of forms required in every different folder. We will be focusing on the required permanent student file, for which includes many of the forms you will review with your students during student orientation and intake and be acquiring your student's signature. Now, back to the checklist for student orientation and intake. The next item on the checklist includes program overview. Use clear, simple language to briefly describe and discuss your program. Talk about your purpose, philosophy, class offerings, and available services. This is a good time to show students around the learning environment and discuss the physical setting, such as the parking lot, restrooms, snack and drink areas, etc. Talk about facility opening and closing times, as well as any program policies regarding attendance and rules of conduct. Notice the last two items on the program overview. These are just two of the required forms to be reviewed with your students during orientation: the rights and responsibilities, and the code of conduct and dress code. The rights and responsibilities, code of conduct, and dress code forms explains the expectations of enrollment in the West Virginia Adult Education Program regarding appropriate behavior, attendance, progress, and dress code. It may be used as is or adapted to more specifically reflect your individual county policy. All students should sign this form and it should be kept in the student permanent file. Students should also receive a copy of their own. At this point, you can refer back to the program files checklist and mark off the signed student rights and responsibilities, code of conduct, and dress code. The next category on the left side of the checklist involves registration forms, which includes the paper student profile form along with accompanying required documentation. Again, back to the program files checklist. You have already marked off the student's rights and responsibilities, code of conduct, and dress code. But please notice that the Adult Education Student Profile Form, along with the West Virginia Adult Ed Student Achievements Form, are required documentation to be retained in the permanent student folder for each student. Let's take a look at these forms and how to complete them. The West Virginia Adult Education Student Profile Form actually consists of 6 different pages. We are going to focus on page 1 and page 2. You will learn more about the remaining pages as you continue through your pre-service activities. Explain clearly the purpose of all registration forms. The West Virginia Adult Education Program uses these forms to collect student performance data, demographics, programmatic information, just to mention a few. Accurate completion of these forms allows the instructor to present information on results of student participation in each adult education class. This type of information is being collected nationwide by programs receiving federal funds for adult education. This data collection system is referenced to as the National Reporting System, or NRS. The NRS which was implemented nationally in July 2000, was designed to ensure that all states collect similar data in similar ways and with identical definitions for the measures. Our state's web-enabled management information system is LACES. LACES stands for Literacy, Adult, and Community Education System, and it is the pinnacle of online student data management software. LACES staff continually update the software to meet all of the NRS guidelines and to collect student performance and demographic data electronically. As necessary, assist in filling out registration forms. The student profile form is a complex and critical document that you will use to transfer your students' data into LACES. Key information may be completed by the student, but you will need to complete portions of the form while consulting with your student one-on-one. It is important to quickly identify students who are struggling with filling out the intake forms. Students should be offered assistance in this process by reading forms aloud if necessary. Embarrassment due to low literacy skills could mean that a person will leave the program and never come back. All programs should partner with a local literacy program for offering assistance in and out of class to lower level students. The student profile form is mandatory and must be completed in its entirety, although it may take several class or student meetings to accomplish this. Once completed, all information must be entered into LACES by Tuesday for the previous week. Let's take a look at the student profile form more closely. On your screen, you will see the top half of page 1 of the student profile form. All portions of the form should be completed based on the status of your student at the time of enrollment. The student profile form follows the order in which you will enter the student's data into LACES, working down the left side column and then moving to the right. First, you will enter the student's intake date. And next, regarding a student's Social Security number, ask students to provide their Social Security number and to sign the Student General Release of Information that is a part of the student profile form. Explain the purpose for the release and it's important in keeping program funding. Let's take a look at that General Release of Information. The General Release of Information is in the second column of the student profile form on page 2. The General Release gives permission for information to be used only to compile reports for the state and to data match information regarding educational and work-related achievements. During the enrollment process, encourage students to sign the release located on the bottom half of the second page of the student profile form. It must be maintained in the student's file. The release of information does not expire unless the student expresses in writing that he or she no longer wishes to share their Social Security number. If this happens, the instructor will need to remove the Social Security number from the student's profile in LACES. This is a safety measure moving forward to ensure the student's data remains confidential due to the sharing of data in real time with partnering agencies, such as Workforce West Virginia or West Virginia Department of Rehabilitation Services. Please note that students do not have to share their Social Security number in order to enroll in adult education classes. Even without a Social Security number, your program can receive credit for educational achievements. However, for students who make achievements involving employment, high school equivalency diploma, or post-secondary education without a Social Security number and a signed general release form, you will not be able to demonstrate achievements using a data match with other agencies. Students need to understand the importance of sharing their Social Security number and know that your program can demonstrate success. Read aloud the Student General Release of Information on the Student Profile Form. This is vital as students may read at a lower level and may not be able to understand the form by reading it silently. You have now completed the intake date and asked the student to record their Social Security number on the student profile form. Next, ask your students to complete their demographics, their last name, their first name, their birth date, and sex. Next, you will move to the program of study. However, you will wait to mark the appropriate program of study after conducting a private interview with your student. Next, you'll move to secondary program. Please select Distance Education, IELCE, or No Secondary Program. Only students enrolled in an integrated English language civics education program will select IELCE. And let's talk further about distance learners. Distance learners are those students who utilize a West Virginia Adult Ed approved distance education curriculum outside of the regular classroom hours as a part of their plan of study. Learners from all educational functioning levels, or EFLs, may be placed into appropriate distance education curricula based on their entry assessment scores or academic and employment goals. There are many distance education software options to meet the varying needs of adult education students, for which you can explore and will learn more about in Section 13 of the Instructor Handbook. When a student is categorized as a distance learner on the student profile form in LACES, this allows the recording of proxy hours, which are attendance hours the student acquires outside of the regular adult education classroom. The student's hours in both distance ed and the classroom programs are included in the total number of contact hours reported in LACES. Now back to the student profile form and on to WIOA Core Program enrollment. Please have your students indicate if they are enrolled in any other WIOA Core program at the time of enrollment into your adult education program. This is something that can be updated as needed. And now, on to student type and student type details. When entering your students into LACES, you can make only one selection under student type and one under student type detail. These student type selections should be based on an order of priority. Please take notes. The student types are listed in LACES in alphabetical order, but they should be indicated on the following order of priority. Number 1, Adult Career Pathway. Number 2, Jobs and Hope. Number 3, Career and Technical Education. Number 4, Higher Ed. Number 5, Workforce West Virginia. And number 6, Vocational Rehabilitation, or DRS. So for example, if a student enrolls in your adult education program to participate in a particular adult career pathway bridge program, and they're registered with and referred to you by Workforce West Virginia, you will select Adult Career Pathway as their student type and Workforce West Virginia under student type detail. Again, this is based on the status of the student at the time of enrollment. Next, please have your student identify whether they're an ESL or English as a Second Language student. Also, have them indicate if they are Hispanic, Latino, and identify their race. And finally, please have your student identify their highest education level completed upon entry into your program. And along with this question, on the top right-hand column of the student profile form, you will find another question related to the highest education level completed. Please have your student indicate if that highest level completed was within a U.S.-based school or a non-U.S.-based school. Moving on to the second column of the student profile form, page 1. Please ask students to complete their employment status. Employment status options are employed, unemployed in the labor force,
not in the labor force, and employed with a separation notice. Please take note on what these 4 different options mean. Employed means currently working. Unemployed in labor force means your student is unemployed but available and actively seeking work. Not in the labor force means that your student is not working and unavailable to work. And finally, employed with separation notice means that your student is working but soon to be unemployed. Next, please have your student identify any cultural barriers. They may select one or more, and these should be discussed in greater detail during your private interview. Next, under non-NRS barriers, have students to please indicate any public assistance they're receiving upon entry into your program or 6 months prior to enrollment. And finally, under source type, please ask the student to share how they became aware of your adult education program and make the appropriate selection. If they mark employer, please ask that they imply the employer name under source name.
Next, moving down the second column on the first page of the student profile form, ask the student to list the number of people in their household and mark the appropriate income range. For students residing in one of the metropolitan areas, please instruct them to mark the middle metropolitan column, and please make note that students residing in Berkeley or Jefferson counties should make their selection in the first column. Please have your students provide their full address.
Now, moving to the second page of the West Virginia Adult Education Student Profile Form. Please have your students provide their mailing preference. And then ask them to identify which of the following devices that they have at their home. And then have them to please provide their contact information and how they prefer to be contacted. Please now have your students indicate their citizenship or immigration status. Please indicate that the student has provided consent for eligibility verification using the West Virginia Adult Education Document Checklist for eligibility verification. Next, let's talk about apparent or disclosed disability. There may be occasions when a student states that he or she has a disability and will need accommodations set up before they can even participate in the orientation and intake process.
When a student states that he or she has a disability and will need accommodations, you should always assure the person that you will try to make accommodations as quickly as possible, and this should demand your immediate action. For some types of disabilities, you may need some time to set up the appropriate accommodations. Never turn away a student with disabilities. For arranging accommodations, please contact Elizabeth Jared for assistance in setting up an interpreter, attaining materials in Braille, large print, audio, etc. In any case, this question should be addressed during the private interview. When a disability is observable, appropriate accommodations might be approved immediately without any documentation required. If a student states that he or she has a learning disability or a disability that is not visible, then that student is required to submit documentation regarding the type of disability in order to receive specific accommodations even during initial assessment. If the student does not have that documentation, you may need to use the Request for Records form located in the Section 4 appendix to obtain school records or records from a diagnostician verifying the disability. If a student shares private information about disabilities, medical conditions, etc. with you or with staff members as a part of screening, Assure them this information is kept confidential. You will only reveal the information if you are making referrals to assist them and if they have signed the release of information.
If a student indicates there are possible barriers, discuss any problems with them that might get in the way of attendance or learning, and document the identified difficulties or barriers. For a sample barrier identification form, please see Plan for Reducing Barriers to Success form in the Handbook Section 5 Appendices. Students who indicate they think they have a learning disability, refer them to either our partner, the West Virginia Division of Rehabilitation Services, or DRS, or a private diagnostician. Document when referrals have been made and if the student has begun receiving services. Please review referrals and release forms found in Section 4 of the Handbook for additional information.
Now, back to the checklist for student orientation and intake. The next item on your checklist includes the learning needs screening. You will be covering a separate video specific to the learning needs screening soon in your pre-service. Career exploration is the next item on the checklist for student orientation and intake. Start the Education and Career Plan, or ECP, with students in the first 12 hours of enrollment by asking them to complete the career choice and how do you see yourself sections. Later during pre-service, you'll have your students explore different jobs of interest and determine the academic requirements for such employment and how those careers relate to the job market. The next two categories on the checklist for student orientation and intake include strengths identification and standardized entry assessment. Every student has strengths, but often self-identifies only their weaknesses. It is important to talk to them about their strengths. Assessment will give you the areas they are stronger in. For example, some students are very good readers. Make sure you highlight that when reviewing the assessment scores. You will be covering more information about strengths identification and standardized entry assessment later in pre-service. And finally, the last item on the checklist for student orientation and intake. This is when you will discuss results and set up a plan of study with your student during a private interview. Find a quiet, private setting to discuss with each individual student the results of their screening instrument, their career profile, and academic assessments. This is a good time to discuss any problems or barriers that might get in the way of attendance or learning and document the identified difficulties. On this student checklist, you will see a list of items to discuss during the private interview. You will then use the outcome of this discussion to set up a plan of study. And next, a document that needs to be reviewed and signed and placed in the student permanent file is the West Virginia Adult Ed Technology Acceptable Use Policy. It is to be used with all adult education students. In addition to this form, if a class exists within a county or agency facility, there may be a second acceptable use policy for that county or agency. Students must sign both forms to utilize technology resources if your county or agency has a separate form. A media release form needs to be filled out by your students to include acknowledgement of the presence of security cameras in your classrooms. If you plan on using a student's picture or citing them in a print format, a PowerPoint presentation, or social media posting, you must have a media release signed form on file. The media release form can be located in the Section 4 Handbook Appendices. A copy of a signed media release should be maintained for every student and located in their permanent student file. And finally, back to the program files checklist. Throughout this presentation and as you conduct student orientation and intake, you will complete and file in the permanent student folder the following forms. The West Virginia Student Profile Form, which includes the very important general release of information. The West Virginia Adult Ed Student Achievements Form, along with the West Virginia Adult Ed Student Technology Acceptable Use Policy, and the Students' Rights and Responsibilities, Code of Conduct, and Dress Code forms. And finally, the Media Release and Security Camera Acknowledgement. All of these forms must be placed in the student's permanent file, along with additional forms that you will hear more about during pre-service.